Hey, Cypher here. Looks like it's time for another top 10 list, because that's what this History channel is all about. You guys can't get enough of it, and this is perhaps the most anticipated one. One of my jobs when I was in the army was to crew an M1A1 Abrams, but I was reclassified as a scout later, which included crewing a Bradley, which is sadly not a tank. But as a former tanker myself, I think I can be a good judge as to what tanks are better than others.
I'm literally in the tank tonight.
That's what we really care about when studying history, after all. We want to know all about what pieces of equipment are better than others. Comparisons of statistics and troop movements is what military historians do, as internet dwellers demand of them. So it's time for Top 10 Tanks of All Time. Number 10. The M149 Water Buffalo. This 400-gallon water tank can be attached to any military vehicle. It's such a perfect design that almost nothing has changed about it since the US Army adopted the original version prior to World War II. Hookups and tank materials are really the only changes to this reliable beast. It can keep a unit hydrated for extended periods of time. Just as my grandpa relied on one as a Navy drill instructor back in the 50s, my unit always had one in the scorching desert of Fort Irwin. The Water Buffalo has made logistics a little bit easier for the last 80 years. But another military tank serves more than water. Number 9. The Boiling Vessel. Officially called the cooking vessel, British troops have regularly used this tank to boil water from within their military vehicles. During World War II, it was a real problem that they had to jump out and make a cup of tea unprotected. So they created a tank that essentially functions as a kettle, but it can do much more than make tea. They cook rations and sanitize plastics. Ever since the Centurion, cavalrymen don't have to expose themselves for the sake of tea.
Better get 5. Stop that! It's silly. Very silly indeed.
But what other kinds of tanks do the military use? Number 8. The septic tank. When troops don't have easy access to sewage systems, but have the time to create the modern convenience of flushing toilets, they turn to septic tanks. You need a place for human refuse to go, and these tanks can be periodically cleaned so that they can be used in perpetuity. This is such a ubiquitous solution that civilians use them all the time. In fact, people are able to live with modern conveniences anywhere by combining septic and water tanks, almost like they were living in the city. These tanks have advanced settlement well beyond what was possible even a century ago. Homesteading isn't as rough as it once was, thanks to this innovation. But some convenient tanks are meant for civilians primarily. Number 7. The Brita filter. This tank can take a few gallons of water and keep it cool in your fridge, but the magic of this tank is the filter built in. By simply pouring water from your tap, you can have cold filtered water ready in your fridge, even if you don't have one of those fancy ones that have a filter built into it. Millions around the world rely on this to easily purify their tap water, especially when old pipes suffer from salinity and mineral deposits. But sometimes you need tanks for bigger populations than all these can provide. Number 6. The Briman Strategic Water Reservoir. Holding the Guinness World Record for the largest water storage facility in the world, this series of tanks can hold over 2 million cubic meters of water. It's in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, and has held that record since 2014. It has 11 individual tanks that can hold around 187,500 cubic meters apiece. In the desert kingdom of Saudi Arabia, this helps keep water flowing for parts of the Hijaz region, which includes Mecca itself. But some water storage isn't a facility. Number 5. Lake Kariba. Water reservoirs can technically be called gigantic tanks, just not in the conventional sense. Lake Kariba, on the border between Zambia and Zimbabwe, is the largest man-made lake. One dam keeps back approximately 180 cubic kilometers of water, across a surface area of 5,500 kilometers squared. Now that's a lot of water. The dam began construction in 1955 and finished in 1959, leaving even the famous Lake Mead behind the Hoover Dam well behind this monumental structure. And it provides an immense amount of power for both countries. So what other kind of large tank can we find? Number 4, the Chevrolet Corvette Z06 tanker. This funky-looking car from 1963 seems like a product of a bygone era. It is a Corvette with a ridiculously large fuel tank, the largest in production car history. Back when people were less concerned about petrol prices, this tank provided enough fuel to go incredible distances without giving up on a powerful engine that made more than 300 horsepower. The tank was 36.5 gallons, which is around double the average fuel capacity of today. But this was only a temporary option for Corvette. Instead, the car industry has focused on fuel efficiency, leaving this one of the rarest cars in the world. But the next tank is anything but rare. Number 3, tank top. This sleeveless shirt, and sometimes sweater, is different from a vest. Tank tops have no buttons, so sports jerseys and undershirts are often tank tops. It is a very ubiquitous style of clothing, but what is unique is where it derives its name. Pools are essentially open-top water tanks, and sometimes these aren't differentiated. A form of swimming suit in the 1920s was the tank suit, and people made shirts out of these designs, hence tank top. But that isn't the strangest tank on this listicle. Number 2, Tank, the song. In the 1990 series Cowboy Bebop, known for leaning into its namesake genre, of course the opening song throughout the show had to be memorable, and indeed it was. Composed by Yoko Kanno and performed by the Seatbelts, it is quite a standout piece for big band swing. It's difficult to think of a similar opening song, and certainly not as memorable. The recent Netflix adaptation had a fairly good rendition of it, but the series was so terrible that we shall not speak of it again.
Spike Spiegel!
No. Spike Spiegel.
The song has no apparent reason for being titled Tank, but it's good enough to deserve number 2 on this list. Another TV series has a tank song, but it's much more practical. Can you guess what that is before we get to number 1? To build suspense for no reason other than to intentionally waste your time, here's a word from my sponsor beforehand. They are Fantasy Welt der Deutschen Panzeren, or Imaginary World of German Tanks. Let's hear what they have to say.
Wir sind ein kostenloses Videospiel, das die Leute Guide wie glauben lässt. Sie könnten Panzer in wirklich Leben vergleichen. Das ist alles. Warum es im Internetdiskurs über Panzervergleich geht. Wer kann in einem Videospiel gewinnen? Oft geht es wirklich darum, eine nationale Identität zu verteidigen. Und wir Deutschen müssen unsere Vergleich verteidigen. Der letzte Schiff in dieser Liste sollte also die glorreiche Königstiger sein. Nichts anderes ist vergleichbar. Wenn Sie es wagen, es zu vergleichen, dann sind Sie ein Degenerierter, der vernichten würdig ist. Nationaler Sticher hasst es das, was alle Panzervergleiche letztendlich ausmachen.
Whatever you said, thanks for that. Without your help, these kinds of military history buff videos couldn't be made. So without further ado, number 1, Thomas the Tank Engine.
You can't touch my britches, even if you had MC Hammer and them 357 bitches. Biggie Smalls.
In the British children's TV show Thomas and Friends, Thomas the Tank Engine is the main character. The stop-action animation may seem creepy at first, but it's endearing. The titular character is an only slightly anthropomorphized tank engine locomotive, portrayed by model trains with claymation faces. Tank engines are merely a water tank boiled to make propulsion. They were the predominant form of locomotion for more than a century, so it's fitting that we end this listicle on a famous pop culture characterization of this venerable tank. What else would you expect from the most meme-worthy music about a tank in an entire listing of the best tanks of all time? As I've clearly shown throughout this, I am an objective observer. Equipment comparisons are the most important part of understanding military history. How else will we be able to tell who wins in a fight? What I consider better or worse is simply from experience and good analysis, not driven by any need to defend my nationality whatsoever, because that's a proper way of understanding conflict. Through minor equipment comparisons, we can determine who will win in a fight.
I fear no man, but that thing. It scares me.
We can determine who will win in a fight, thereby fulfilling my video game fantasies. That's the reason to study history, and anyone who looks at military history in any other way than to determine national supremacy is not a historian, duh. After all, I'm a historian and a US Army tanker. This whole episode isn't an April Fool's joke to prove a point at all. So let me just end with a proverb I learned from my cavalry days. When she left, she wore a yellow ribbon. She wore it in the springtime in the merry month of May. And when you asked her why the hell she wore it for her man who was far, far away, far away, far away. She wore it for her man who was far, far away. Around the block she pushed the baby carriage. She pushed it in the springtime in the merry month of May. And when you asked her why the hell she pushed it for her man who was far, far away, far away, far away. She pushed it for her man who was far, far away. Behind the door, her daddy kept a shotgun. He kept it in the springtime in the merry month of May. And when you asked him why the hell he kept it for her man who was far, far away, far away, far away. He kept it for her man who was far, far away. God, this is so stupid.